All right, we are continuing with our connective tissues topic, and we are going to talk about supportive connective tissues and then fluid connective tissues in this video. So supportive connective tissues are going to help our body maintain its posture, so being able to stay upright in that upright position, and then help protect our internal organs like our heart and lungs. So we have two major types of supportive connective tissue. This is cartilage and bone. Cartilage has a semi-solid matrix, so instead of having a very viscous and liquidy matrix surrounding all of those cells and fibers like we saw in connective tissue proper, this is going to be semi-solid. And then cartilage is also going to have a cell type called chondrocytes in the lacunae. We'll talk about that in a little bit. And then cartilage is avascular, so it does not have blood vessels supplying this type of connective tissue. Bone, on the other hand, has a solid matrix composed of something called hydroxyapatite, which is a form of calcium phosphate. So this is partially how we store calcium in our body. Bone is going to have a special type of cell called osteocytes, also in something called the lacunae, and bone is vascular, so there are blood vessels running through our bone. So we have some different types of cartilage. We have hyaline cartilage, seen right here, fibrocartilage, and elastic cartilage. All right. So hyaline cartilage, this is the most common type of cartilage found in our body. This has a lot of short and very dispersed collagen fibers in it, so we're not actually seeing the collagen fibers in these pictures, but they are there, and again, they're pretty far dispersed from each other. But we have a lot of proteoglycans, so special structures that are going to be proteins with some glycerin molecules on them. Under the microscope, seen over here in the left-hand image, this is going to appear relatively clear because there is not a lot of fibers in here. So we can see these cells, but we're not seeing those fibers, and it's just some of that matrix, that semi-solid matrix. So hyaline cartilage, the surface of it is very, very smooth. It is both strong and flexible, this particular type of cartilage. And we see this a lot in the rib cage, so that connecting cartilage between the ribs and the sternum is hyaline cartilage. We also see it in our nose, so that flexible part of the tip of your nose is hyaline cartilage. And then we can also see this on the surface of bone where they form movable joints. So this is the type of cartilage seen in our joints, like shoulders and elbows, knees, so on and so forth. We also see a plate of hyaline cartilage towards the ends of bone, inside of the bone, so kind of in between like the head of the bone and the longer part of bones. And this plate of hyaline cartilage is an epiphyseal growth plate. We'll talk more about that when we talk about skeletal tissue specifically in another week. But this is going to, that layer of hyaline cartilage inside the bone is going to provide a framework for the cells of bone to build out actual bone tissue. And so we see that hyaline cartilage younger, so in children, and it slowly gets smaller and smaller and smaller as we get older, and our bones slow in growth, in length at least. They are still going to repair themselves, but they're not going to get longer. Fibrocartilage, on the other hand, this one seen here in the middle, is very, very tough. We have a lot of very thick bundles of collagen fibers, and so you can see those bundles represented in this graphical depiction, and over here in the histology slide, we see these bundles of collagen fibers, and that's kind of what helps make it very, very tough and durable. This allows it to resist a lot of compression and absorb shock, so giving us basically a shock absorber in our body. So we see this in certain types of joints, especially the ones down in our legs, like the knee. That's going to take a lot of shock to those particular joints as we're walking or running. We also see this in our jaw. And the intervertebral discs are another example of fibrocartilage. So those discs in between the vertebrae of our spine. So you can kind of imagine how each of those types of joints would take a lot of shock and strain on them, and we need that extra collagen to support those particular joints and prevent damage to the bone and the rest of the body. All right, so other than that collagen, we have some chondrocytes in there. As you can see, not a whole lot of them. It's mostly this collagen fiber in the matrix. And then last but not least, our elastic cartilage. As the name implies, we're going to see a lot of elastic fibers in the matrix, along with those chondrocytes that are found in cartilage. And so elastic cartilage is going to give some very rigid support that provides a little bit of elasticity. So this is going to be found kind of where your earlobes are. So if you kind of gently tug at your earlobes, they'll bounce back to their initial shape pretty quickly. And so that's a very common place that we see that elastic cartilage in the body. All right, next supportive tissue, connective tissue type is bone, and we will talk more in detail about bone when we do the week with the skeletal system and articulations, but this is the hardest of all of our connective tissues. It's going to help support the body and provide protection to the internal organs again. So the very, very rigid extracellular matrix is mostly collagen fibers that are embedded in that hydroxyapatite. This is mineralized ground substance. So instead of that ground substance being very, very fluid and liquidy, we're going to basically put this chemical in there, that hydroxyapatite, which is again a type of calcium phosphate, and that's going to help solidify our bone. All right, and so you can see here we've got osteocytes, and this is going to be a lacunae. We'll talk more about that when we get to that bone chapter later on, but we've got osteocytes, and then we've got some layers of collagen fibers starting to build that up. This center part, that dark part, is the central canal. That's where blood vessels and nerves come through, so that our bone keeps getting nutrients and everything, because our bone is living tissue in our body, and so we need that extra support. Okay, so both of the pictures shown here are microscopic images that are taken directly out of body. They're just stained a little bit differently because we have a lot of different dyes that we can use for different things. And so bone obviously is not going to be very, very flexible between that hydroxyapatite solidifying the matrix and then those really dense collagen fibers. We don't get a lot of movement from our bones. Obviously, if they get moved too much in the wrong direction, they are going to break, and then we need time to repair those. It's actually really cool how our body repairs those. We'll get to that another week. But this is what the inside of bone looks like. So lots of these osteocytes. We'll talk more about osteoblasts another time, as well as the bone marrow, what makes up bone marrow. But this is a lot of specialized bone cells, collagen fibers, and then that hydroxyapatite that is solidifying that bone tissue. And so obviously, our thoracic cage, so the ribs, spine, and sternum, are going to protect some of our very, very essential organs, the heart and lungs. We've got our skull protecting our brain, another really essential organ. The kidneys even are slightly protected by the lower portion of the rib cage, as well as some of that adipose tissue that we talked about in the previous video. So this is all going to help protect those really, really vital organs. All right, let's talk about fluid connective tissues now. So cells in this type of connective tissue are going to be circulating in a liquid extracellular matrix. These are going to transport various materials, and we are going to see this in blood and lymph. And so those are our two fluid connective tissues in the body that are helping to connect different parts of the body together and integrate all of these different parts of the body and different functions. So Blood is going to be made up primarily of erythrocytes, or red blood cells, that you can see indicated here. This is a stained slide of actual blood cells. We've got a white blood cell right here. This is a lymphocyte. We'll talk more about that when we do blood later on in the semester. About halfway through the semester, we'll do an entire chapter on blood. But blood is going to not only carry oxygen from the lungs to our cells, but it's also going to pick up carbon dioxide and take it back to the lungs to be expelled, as well as other nutrients that are going to be traveling through blood, and hormones, certain enzymes, chemical signals and stuff like that are all going to be traveling through our bloodstream, and that helps connect different areas of the body to each other, and that's how it functions as a connective tissue, even though it is a fluid connective tissue. Also in our blood, we're going to have platelets in the liquid extracellular matrix that are going to help with clotting. So that's really, really important. Obviously, when we have a cut or scrape and we need to repair something, we've got to stop that blood flow from getting out of the vessels, and platelets are going to do that. Too far. Lymph, we don't have a picture of lymph because it is not going to have a lot of cells in it. Again, liquid matrix, but it's going to have the cells it does have are white blood cells, different types of white blood cells. Lymphatic capillaries, we'll talk more about these much later on in the semester with the lymphatic and immune system chapter, but they allow a lot of fluid back into the bloodstream. So as blood travels through the body, some of that extracellular matrix, this fluid, is going to leak out of our capillaries as we are delivering gases and nutrients and stuff to cells and picking up waste products. A lot of that fluid is going to leak out of our blood vessels, but we don't want that just floating around in our body. We need that fluid back in our bloodstream to help maintain a lot of our body functions, and our lymphatic system is kind of the collection for all of that extra fluid, as well as being part of our immune system. And so lymph is going to collect all of that excess fluid and then deliver it back into the blood vessels at certain locations in the body. So it's helping to keep all of those systems integrated together and making sure that we are not losing a bunch of fluid somewhere in the body. Last but not least, we're going to talk about the organization of connective tissues. And so under different membranes in the body, we can have different layers of connective tissues that function to connect a bunch of different internal structures. So we have superficial fascia, deep fascia, and subserous fascia. And so this is how fascia are organized. These are, again, going to be connecting different layers together. So that superficial fascia is going to be a lot of connection between that cutaneous membrane, or the skin, and is mostly made out of areolar and adipose connective tissue, because we're not doing a whole lot there. We do want that thin layer of fat under our skin for some padding, but we don't need a ton of it, obviously. And then that areolar connective tissue is going to offer some strength and support to that connection between the skin and the underlying tissue. Underneath that is our deep fascia, is going to be our next layer here, and you can see that this occurs in multiple levels underneath the skin. So we've got a layer right here directly under the skin, a layer in between muscle, and then a layer under the muscle before we go even deeper. And so this is mostly made out of dense connective tissue, so this gives us some very durable framework surrounding those muscles, bones, and nerves to kind of keep everything in place where it needs to be. And then we have that subserous fascia. So it is going to be found in between that last layer of deep fascia and the serous membranes lining different organs and structures in our body. This is areolar connective tissue, and this is just an anchor point for those serous membranes to surround whatever those other structures are that they need to be surrounding. All right, our next video will cover muscle tissue.